rain drummed a staccato beat against the window, a gloomy chorus to match my thoughts. I took a drag on my cigarette, the ember flaring in the dim light of my cramped office at the Grand Malcolm Hotel. Room 237 had seen better days, much like myself. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on the desk, an old friend and constant temptation. The jarring ring of the phone shattered the bitter silence. I snatched it up, my right hand trembling slightly, an unwelcome reminder. "Morgan Graves," I answered, my voice rough from the cigarettes and regret. "Mr. Graves, this is Lisa calling from the news agency. I'm sorry to bother you, but we have an urgent case. A journalist named Olivia Radcliffe has gone missing while investigating a story at the Whaley's House. Her last known footage is disturbing, to say the least. We need you to look into it." I glanced at Dog, my loyal mutt, sleeping fitfully in the corner. No rest for either of us tonight. "Send me the details. I'll take the case." 30 minutes later, I hunched over my battered laptop, steeling myself for the horrors that technology could dredge up. Olivia's pale face filled the screen, her eyes wide with barely restrained terror as she inched down the dark hallway. And then, in a burst of static and strangled screams, she was gone, consumed by an unseen malevolence. The video ended, but the nightmare was just beginning. The Whaley's House loomed before me like a mausoleum, its Victorian facade a faded remnant of grander days. I parked my car and stepped out into the chilled morning air, tugging my coat tighter against the pervasive drizzle that blanketed the grounds. The house cast a long shadow as I mounted the crumbling steps, the weathered wood creaking under my weight. An omen, perhaps, of the secrets straining beneath the surface, eager to be uncovered. My right hand trembled as I raised it to knock, an old injury and older doubts resurfacing. I shoved it into my pocket just as the door swung open with a prolonged groan. A man stood in the doorway, his age indeterminate, but his eyes ancient. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, magnifying the penetrating gaze he fixed upon me. "Welcome to the Whaley's House, Mr. Graves. We've been expecting you." His voice was smooth, almost melodic, but it did little to ease the unease crawling up my spine. "I'm Matthew Wells, your guide through this historical treasure." I stepped into the foyer, the musty scent of old wood and older secrets enveloping me. The click of the door shutting behind us was like a gunshot in the stillness. Matthew smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes, and gestured for me to follow. The Whaleys were a prominent family, pillars of the community, he began, leading me down a long corridor lined with faded portraits that seemed to track our every move. "But every pillar casts a shadow, Mr. Graves, and some shadows are darker than others." We paused before a painting of a severe-looking man, his gaze as cold as a winter grave. "Thomas Whaley," Matthew said, almost reverently. "He built this house on the ruins of an old execution site. Some say the screams of the condemned can still be heard on quiet nights. I barely suppressed a shudder as we continued our macabre tour. The house seemed to breathe around us, the walls exhaling stale, frigid air as we climbed the groaning staircase. Cobwebs draped the corners like tattered lace, and the floorboards protested our every step with eerie creaks and moans. Matthew chattered on, his voice a dissonant counterpoint to the oppressive atmosphere. He spoke of the house's history, of its role as a courtroom, a theatre, a morgue. But it was what he didn't say that caught my attention. The pauses that hung just a bit too long, the glances that darted away just a bit too quickly. Ghosts lurked in those silences, phantoms of a truth too grim to voice. We came to a stop outside a nondescript door at the end of the second-floor hallway. The wood was marred with scratches, the marks of desperate hands clawing for escape. A shiver traced the length of my spine as Matthew turned to face me, his expression inscrutable. And here we have the heart of the mystery, Mr. Graves. The room where Dr. Ainsworth conducted his experiments, where boundaries were pushed and lines were crossed and minds were expanded. He opened the door with a theatrical flourish, revealing a room that was at once utterly unremarkable and profoundly unsettling. Bare walls, bare floor, bare window, but the air was thick with a presence I couldn't quite define, a weight that pressed against my temples and set my teeth on edge. I stepped inside, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the cloying silence. 3 paces in, the world tilted. A wave of vertigo crashed over me, blurring my vision and roiling my gut. I braced myself against the wall, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as the room seemed to pulse around me. Through the haze, I heard Matthew's voice, distant and somehow mocking. Fascinating, isn't it? How some are more receptive than others. I staggered back into the hallway, my composure as ragged as my breathing. Matthew watched me with clinical interest, his head cocked to the side like a bird eyeing a particularly juicy worm. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice rough as sandpaper. "A taste, Mr. Graves. A mere hint of the forces at play here. Dr. Ainsworth's legacy lives on, you see, in these walls, in these rooms, in the very air we breathe." I opened my mouth to respond, but the clack of approaching heels cut me off. A woman rounded the corner, her appearance as crisp and severe as the cut of her tailored suit. Her eyes, a piercing blue, narrowed as they settled on me. "Mr. Graves, I presume. I wasn't informed of any official visits today." Matthew stepped forward, his smile as oily as his voice. "Ah, Ms. Foster, I was just giving our esteemed guest a tour of our facilities. Mr. Graves here is quite interested in the Ainsworth experiments." Grace Foster's gaze could have flash-frozen a bonfire. "Is that so? Well, I'm afraid I'll have to cut the tour short. The Whaley's House has a reputation to uphold, and we can't have unsubstantiated rumors tarnishing our good name. Now can we?" It wasn't a question. It was a warning, wrapped in a threat, delivered with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. I met her stare with one of my own, unflinching. "I'm not here to tarnish anything, Miss Foster. I'm here to find the truth. About Olivia Radcliffe, about Dr. Ainsworth, about whatever the hell is going on in this godforsaken place." She held my gaze for a long moment, a silent battle of wills. Then, with a smile that could have chilled a desert, she turned on her heel. "Follow me, Mr. Graves. Let's discuss this in my office." Grace's office was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Clean lines, modern furniture, not a speck of dust in sight. She sat behind her desk like a queen on her throne, all cold poise and colder eyes. Mr. Graves, I'll be frank. The Whaley's House is a historic institution. We cannot afford to have our reputation sullied by baseless accusations and sensationalist journalism. I leaned forward, meeting her icy stare with a fire of my own. There's nothing baseless about a missing woman, Ms. Foster. Olivia Radcliffe came here looking for the truth. I intend to find it. She steepled her fingers, her red nails gleaming like drops of blood against her alabaster skin. And what truth do you think you'll find, Mr. Graves? The ravings of a madman long dead? Ghost stories to frighten children? I held my ground, unfazed. I think I'll find what Olivia found. Something you and your people are desperate to keep hidden. Something about Ainsworth's experiments. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or maybe recognition. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of cool disdain. I think you'll find, Mr. Graves, that some doors are best left unopened. Some secrets are best left buried, for everyone's sake. It was a dismissal, as clear as the one on her nameplate. I stood, straightening my coat with a deliberate slowness. We'll see about that, Miss Foster. We'll see. I left her office with more questions than answers, but with a renewed determination. The Whaley's house was hiding something dark and dangerous, and I was going to drag it into the light, no matter the cost. My steps echoed in the empty hallway as I made my way back to the foyer. The portraits seemed to watch me with accusing eyes, their painted faces twisted into sneers of contempt. I paused at the foot of the stairs, a sudden chill washing over me. In the antique mirror that hung on the wall, my reflection stared back at me. But it was wrong, distorted. For a split second, I swore I saw someone standing behind me, a figure in a white lab coat, his face a blur of shadows. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but there was no one there. Just Matthew, watching me with that same inscrutable smile. See something interesting, Mr. Graves? I shook my head, trying to clear the cobwebs of unease. Just ghosts, Mr. Wells. Just ghosts. His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, there are more than ghosts here, Mr. Graves. So much more. You'll see. With that cryptic comment hanging in the air, he led me to the door. The daylight was jarring after the gloom of the house. Too bright, too harsh. I squinted against it as I made my way down the steps, the gravel of the driveway crunching under my feet. I paused at my car, looking back at the house. It loomed above me, a dark sentinel, guarding even darker secrets. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me, inviting me to uncover its mysteries. The city library was a sanctuary of silence amidst the chaos of the streets. I walked through the stacks, the musty scent of old books and older secrets thick in the air. Dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through the high windows, a ghostly ballet in the stillness. I found the archives in the basement, a cavernous room filled with shelves that groaned under the weight of the past. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach for me as I moved deeper into the gloom. I searched for hours, poring over yellowed newspapers and faded photographs, chasing ghosts and rumors through the pages of history. And then, buried in a box of old military records, I found it. A black and white photo, grainy and blurred, but unmistakable. Soldiers in a makeshift laboratory, their faces grim and their eyes haunted. And in the center, a man in a white coat, his features obscured by shadows. The caption read, "Project Morpheus, 1943, and scrawled in the margin, in a hand that shook with something more than age, a name: Dr. Edwin Ainsworth. The tremor in my hand intensified as I stared at the photo, a chill crawling up my spine. I dug deeper, unearthing fragments of truth like shards of a broken mirror, redacted military reports, whispers of mind control experiments, of behavior modification and psychological conditioning. And always, the name Ainsworth, lurking in the shadows like a spectre. There were other photos too, grainy images of the Whaley's House in its wartime guise, military trucks unloading equipment into the back entrance. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was one I wasn't sure I wanted to see. I left the library with a head full of questions and a heart heavy with foreboding. The sun was setting as I stepped out into the street, painting the city in shades of blood and shadow. I lit a cigarette and let the smoke fill my lungs, a bitter taste to match my thoughts. Olivia's apartment building loomed before me, a nondescript brick monolith that could have housed 1,000 secrets. I made my way up to the 5th floor, the elevator groaning and shuddering like a dying beast. Her door was ajar, the lock splintered and hanging. I drew my gun, the weight of it familiar and comforting in my hand. I nudged the door open with my foot, the hinges screaming in protest. The apartment was a shrine to chaos, papers and books strewn across every surface. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. In the living room, a wall was covered in photographs and newspaper clippings, a mad collage of conspiracy and paranoia. And at the center, like the eye of a storm, the Whaley's House. I found her laptop in the bedroom, still open and humming. The screen was a maze of folders and files, a digital labyrinth of her investigation. I clicked through them, my eyes scanning the words, searching for the thread that would unravel this mystery. And then I found it. Emails to herself, a diary of sorts, chronicling her descent into the rabbit hole. Mentions of altered behavioral patterns, of anomalous sound frequencies in the experiment room, an attached file, a recording of something that sounded like the wailing of the damned. A knock at the door jolted me out of my reverie. I snapped the laptop shut and moved to the living room, my gun drawn and ready. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I peered through the peephole and saw a man in a crisp suit, his face a mask of professional indifference. I recognized him from the library archives. Richard Green, government spook. I opened the door, my gun still in hand. Green raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. Mr. Graves, some cases are best left unexamined. I smiled, but it was a smile that could cut glass. I'm not one for leaving stones unturned, Mr. Green, especially when people go missing. He sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. The government has a vested interest in certain matters remaining undisturbed, matters of national security. And Olivia Radcliffe? Was she a matter of national security? Green's face could have been carved from stone. Miss Radcliffe was investigating things that were best left in the past, for her own safety and the safety of others. I leaned against the doorframe, my eyes never leaving his. See, that's the thing about the past, Mr. Green. It has a nasty habit of not staying buried. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, holding it out to me. The government is prepared to offer a substantial donation to your efforts, Mr. Graves, in exchange for your discretion. I looked at the envelope, then back at him. I lit a cigarette, taking a long drag before blowing the smoke in his face. Keep your money, Green. I'm not in this for the payout. I'm in it for the truth." His eyes hardened, his jaw clenching. "The truth, Mr. Graves, can be a very dangerous thing, for all involved." I smiled again, a slash of teeth in the gloom. "I'm a dangerous man, Mr. Green. Or haven't you heard?" He looked at me for a long moment, something like respect, warring with something like fear in his eyes. Then he nodded, a curt jerk of his head. "On your own head be it, Graves. But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I watched him go, a sense of unease settling in my gut. I had a feeling that this case was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Back at the Grand Malcolm, I poured myself a drink and settled into my chair, Olivia's laptop open before me. I clicked through her files, my eyes scanning the words, searching for the key that would unlock this mystery. And then the phone rang, a shrill sound in the stillness. I picked it up, my voice rough and tired. Graves. "Mr. Graves, this is Dr. Helen Sorensen. I believe we may be able to assist each other. I have information about mind control that you may find pertinent." I sat up straight, my heart pounding. "I'm listening." She sighed, a sound of infinite sadness. "Ainsworth was a brilliant man, Mr. Graves, but brilliance can be a burden and a curse." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the shadows that danced on the wall. "Tell me everything, Doctor, from the beginning." And so she did. She spoke of Ainsworth's early experiments, of his obsession with the human mind and its untapped potential. She spoke of government funding and military interest, of projects that pushed the boundaries of science and sanity. She sent me files, diagrams and notes, a glimpse into a world I couldn't begin to understand. Brainwave patterns and neural activity maps, formulas and equations that made my head spin. And always, the spectre of Ainsworth, hovering over it all like a malevolent god. He found something, Mr. Graves, something that shouldn't have been possible. A way to control the very essence of what makes us human. I stared at the screen, at the words that seemed to blur and twist before my eyes. And the Whaley's House? What does it have to do with all of this? There was a pause, a silence that stretched into infinity. Everything, Mr. Graves. It has everything to do with it. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. I poured myself another drink, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the glass. And then I saw it. A shadow in the corner of the room, a figure that shouldn't have been there. I blinked, and it was gone, but the unease remained, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. I looked up into the mirror, and for a moment, my reflection seemed to waver, to shift and change into something dark and twisted. I closed my eyes, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. When I opened them again, the reflection was my own, but the fear remained, a dark seed taking root in my soul. I walked back into the room, my steps unsteady. The laptop screen glowed in the darkness, the diagrams and formulas seeming to dance and writhe before my eyes. And then I heard it, a whisper, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Some mysteries, Mr. Graves, are best left unsolved, for the sake of your sanity and your soul." I whirled around, my gun in my hand, but there was no one there, just shadows and silence, and the echo of a voice that couldn't possibly be real. I sank into my chair, my head in my hands. I had a feeling that I was in over my head, that I had stumbled into something far darker and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. I looked at the laptop, at the secrets and lies that glowed on the screen. I took a deep breath, and I clicked on the next file, and I fell deeper into the rabbit hole, into a darkness from which there might be no return.